Yo, what's going on YouTube? Kerner here, welcome back to the channel. So today's video is actually going to be a bit of a throwback style video. It's been a while and I've been looking at what I've been doing and honestly, not the happiest with it. A lot of the reason why I started making content in the first place was because I figured some stuff out, might as well share with the rest of you guys. And that has since changed over the years. It's been a long time since that time. And the other reason I actually made content was because I just liked sharing that information with you guys. And somewhere along the line, I lost that. I lost the reason why I enjoyed making content to begin with, and it became a bit more corpa without really the rewards of corpa. So I kind of want to pull things back a little bit, go back to my original style of doing things, at least on this channel specifically. I am still going to be doing some of the more edited stuff in the mix as well, but when it comes to this guide stuff, I kind of want to take that approach that I did in the past that worked so well for so many people. I don't want them to be super long like they used to be, but I do want them to be a little bit more, I guess the best word is like intimate, a little bit easier to follow and a little bit more hand-holdy, if you will. So today's video, I'm going to be going over subclasses. What subclasses apply to every single class in the game, how they can be useful, what subclasses you should be keeping an eye out for based on your playstyle in NGS. But before we jump to that, as per usual, in Chrono, cover PSO2 content, and much appreciated subscribers working towards that 10K mark. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into this. So before we start this video off, I'll give you guys a bit of a disclaimer. When it comes down to deciding on subclasses, there's two schools of thought. There is, I want to use another weapon from another class, and there is, I want to utilize my class the best I possibly can. Neither one of them is wrong. If you're deciding that you want to choose a subclass based on the fact that you want to use another weapon from another class, then by all means, go for it. However, that's not really the way classes are designed in PSO2. However, nothing is really that difficult that you have to go with the exact way things are designed. Damage is a choice, not really a requirement in this game. You can choose to do as much damage as you want to. Realistically speaking, nowhere in this game has it ever forced you to do the most amount of damage possible outside of very, very niche situations. So if someone's telling you, hey, you can't play that subclass, you can probably ignore them. However, if you come to me saying, hey, I want to play this, but I want to be tankier, and you're choosing the wrong subclass to be that extra level of tanky, that's a different perspective in a different situation. So I've rambled on enough as it is. Let's go ahead and talk about the different subclass choices. So the easy way to start this out, actually, and I've kind of gone over this a couple of times, is to talk about like the universal subclass choices based on specific situations and how they apply. Just because they apply to so many classes and I will end up repeating myself a lot, I want to talk about why you would choose certain subclasses overall, and then we'll talk about every individual class and how they apply to those classes. So subclass wise, first class we're going to talk about is Fighter. Fighters, if you just want more down damage. If the target gets knocked down, you deal more damage to a target that's downed. So that's why you'd use that. Subclass, an extra 5% damage. It's not terrible, but it's not amazing. Pretty much the only reason you'd look at it. Ranger's a subclass choice. You would pick this primarily for Stealth Strike. Alternatively, you could pick it as a subclass whenever you're fighting Darkfall's Dalian, because the skill, where is it? It's one of the Blight Round skills. I don't remember exactly what it is, but essentially what happens is whenever you attack a target that's Blight Round, but you're not attacking the Blight Round spot, you still get increased damage. This works on Darkfall's Dalian when you're fighting his 4 individual targets or whatever. So you can use Ranger for that reason. Also use it for Stealth Strike. Stealth Strike is going to be very useful when we talk about another skill that other classes have, much like Ranger. I'm going to allude to it. But Stealth Strike is another reason you would pick this. You can also technically pick it for Bad Condition and Bad Condition Ward, basically the Guardian status ailments, but no one really does. They're not annoying enough to have to worry about it, and you can actually deal with them fairly easily outside of subclass choices. So it's mostly going to be for Darkfall's Dalian if you have a Ranger during that phase, or for Stealth Strike, as long as you don't need another subclass for any other reason. Skip over Gunner, we're moving to Force. Force is a subclass that's chosen primarily for the extra PP whenever a target dies. It's primarily for the skill, where is it? Eradication PP gain. It's so you can generate more PP while you're in PSE bursts and things of that sort. PP conversion is also useful, and so is PP recovery boost, but this is primarily the reason why you would take this subclass, is just for this one skill. Now this can be circumvented now with weapons as well as EX augments. However, people still will just grab Force subclass since it's easy and not have to worry about those other things in case they're in that specific situation. The also niche situation that you would use it for, we'll talk about when we actually talk about Tector and Force. Moving on to Tector. Tector is taken primarily for a weak element amplifier and awake ale, or however it's called. Basically, it's for more PB generation. This is primarily what it's taken for. So you generate more PB quicker, that way you can use it more easily. Keep in mind that it doesn't lower the cooldown of your PB or your actual PB, it just means you generate your PB faster. So if you're already generating it to the point where you're getting it on cooldown, this isn't going to help you. Skipping over Braver, we don't really use Braver for anything. It's got like one niche use. It would be for the breakfall HP gain, for you to regen HP whenever you fall over, in case HP regen is an issue for you, or if you're looking at some of the new EX augments that have certain conditions, this might be useful for you, but that's mostly what you would take this for. Bouncer is useful primarily for partial destroy advantage. Essentially, whenever you break parts, you can get a stacking damage buff, and that damage buff can be useful for an entire fight. Pretty solid, pretty powerful, not insanely powerful, not over the top, and of course, you have to be fighting something that can actually be broken, but that's pretty much it. That and the feed amplifier is also fairly useful. It's, you know, for extra physical down and elemental down and all that good stuff. So those are the two primary reasons you would take Bouncer as a subclass choice. Waker is actually your de facto defensive choice. Things like welfare management and retro friends rescue are going to help you survive. So that's why you would pick up Waker as a subclass choice. I guess also technically Resta Effect Continuance also is helpful too. And Lucky Sign. So all these are pretty solid from a defensive perspective and survival perspectives, and that's pretty much going to be about it. Slayer is the de facto I want more damage choice, and there's no other way for me to get damage realistically that's reasonable. I just want damage at all times. It's for the 5% extra crit chance. It's critical rate up. Actually 3% apparently. There's somewhere else we're getting to. Oh yeah, here we go. Gallant attack up and critical up. I was like, I know it's 5%, I just don't remember from where. 3% from all time, 2 extra percent whenever you're fighting a boss. So getting extra 5% crit rate at all times, essentially as long as you're fighting a boss, which realistically speaking, you're only going to be optimized for fighting bosses in most situations. If you're optimizing for fighting PSE, it's not for more damage a lot of times, it's for just the right amount of damage. And that's pretty much it for all the different classes and why you would choose them as subclasses. If I didn't mention a class, it's because you don't really choose it as a subclass or its actual skills in the subclass. Like I mentioned, if you're someone who just wanted to use another weapon, that's totally fine. That's totally reasonable if that's the route you're going about it. I do play Bouncer Hunter from time to time because I have a multi-weapon sword that I use for PSEs. So whenever I'm going PSE hunting or anything along those lines, fighting a boss, I'm just using my soaring blades as per usual. But if I'm in a PSE burst, I would just use my sword for AoE, for easy AoE that can just turn my brain off and do. And it works very, very well since I have the weapon set up for it. And that's pretty much it when it comes down to it. It's totally fine. It's totally reasonable choice to make if that's what you're looking for, but that's not what most of these subclasses are about. Realistically speaking, when you pick a class, you pick the weapon technically first, you pick the class that supports that weapon, and you pick the subclass that supports that main class. So I've told everyone when they're trying to figure out their classes, it's the easiest way to go about it, at least in my opinion. Now, let's talk about the individual classes and what subclasses you would pick for those classes. So to start things off, we go with the usual, the tried and true Hunter. Hunter really only has one subclass choice. It's pretty normal, and it's going to be Slayer. I'm going to take Slayer just for the extra crit chance. Crit chance is kind of king in this situation. We don't have enough crit chance to the point where we would ignore it, so we would take it for free. And all the other options for damage really are too conditional, where this is going to be the most useful. You can make an argument for Fighter and Bouncer based on what you're fighting. Force, of course, useful for PP, and Tector, again, is going to be useful in case you're trying to get extra PB generation depending upon what you're dealing with or what you're fighting. But that's pretty much going to be about it as far as subclass choices for Hunter. Moving into Fighter, pretty much the same thing. You're going to be looking at mostly Slayer. Fighter's pretty well self-contained and has everything that it needs. You can look at going into Force if you need the PP. You can look at Bouncer if you want to look at damage conditionally based on specific situations, which again, they do apply. There are situations like that that are going to be useful. Usually it's ARC's record-based stuff. Of course, you have Waker if you want to be tankier for some reason. But yeah, it's mostly just going to be Slayer as your de facto choice most of the time. Again, Ranger applies in that DFD situation. Moving on to Ranger. Ranger is a bit different. So Ranger has a skill called Long Range Advantage and has Stealth Strike. So you want to make sure you have Stealth Strike slotted in. You do not want Threat as much as possible. As long as you're in a party, as long as you don't have Threat, you have a 15% damage bonus. Pretty solid. It's very powerful. So you definitely do want to make sure that you are not skimping out on taking Stealth Strike. As far as subclass choices, pretty much the same situation as Hunter and Fighter. Mostly Slayer. You can argue for Bouncer and Fighter. Force is an argument that can be made as well in case you need the extra PP, and Tector in case you need the extra PP generation. Gunner is a bit different. Gunner has long range advantage, but you see it doesn't have Stealth Strike. So by default, you probably want to go with Ranger if that's Stealth Strike. It is a toss-up. There's not a guarantee that you're going to be in a situation where you needed Stealth Strike, but making sure that you have long range advantage active at all times that it's possible is an extra 15% damage. You'll find that tends to beat out anything else that you can get in that situation itself. You can make the gamble that someone else is going to do more damage than you, like in a lot of group fighting and a lot of like speed runs and groups. That is the case, so people will opt to not take that. However, for most players, I would recommend going ahead and taking Stealth Strike on Ranger if you're playing Gunner. And if you're solo, just go with Slayer, get the extra crit chance. All the other things still technically apply, just don't apply enough in this situation where I would recommend them to you guys. Moving on to Force. Force also has long range advantage, so that option for Ranger does come up again. However, Force does very little damage these days. So in most situations, you're not going to have threats. You can make that gamble a little bit more often, and a lot of forces tend to default Detector as they have some similar skills. You're able to alleviate some of your skill points that are used on your main skill by taking them, or main class tree, by taking them in your subclass tree. They still apply the same way. So Detector is a pretty popular choice for Force. However, again, same thing applies when you're looking at it from the ranger's perspective. You want to make sure that you always have long range advantage as much as possible. You can't trust the people you play with are going to do more damage than you. I would take Ranger as a subclass. If you're doing solo content, Detector's not a bad choice. Also, Slayer is a pretty solid choice for extra damage, so you're pretty much good to go there. Everything I just said for Force also applies to Detector in the exact same way. Realistically speaking, you're not going to do more damage than most people. However, if there is a chance, it's best for you to make sure that long range advantage is active than it would be for you to take that gamble in a party-based content, especially if you're playing with a bunch of pugs and you actually gear yourself up. There's a good chance that you could still take threat if you're playing properly. I know that seems kind of crazy, but a lot of people use the free gear, so just keep that in mind. However, if you are pretty confident in the people that are around you and you think, hey, that's not going to happen, or hey, maybe I'm just not that insanely great at the game, I have pretty low gear, then you can pretty comfortably go into taking something like Slayer, something like Force, as your subclass options in those situations. Moving on, we have Braver. Braver depends on your playstyle. So for Braver, if you're playing hybrid Braver where you're playing Katana and playing Bow, in that situation, I would probably default to Slayer. In most cases, you're going to find when you're playing hybrid Braver, you're mostly playing Katana with very little Bow gameplay in the mix. Bow is kind of just a supporting weapon to your Katana, not that, you know, Bow is pretty bad, don't get me wrong, but Bow is actually very powerful in the situation that you're using it with Katana, because all of the downtime you normally have with Bow, you're using a Katana instead. That's not to say Katana does a ton of damage as it is. It does still need some help. It does still suffer in some situations. However, most situations you're going to be taking Slayer as your subclass choice, and all the other subclass choices apply in the same way. Again, Ranger if you're in a DFD situation, Force if you're looking for PP, Detector if you're looking in a situation where you want to get that PB faster, maybe an ARCS record, so on and so forth. All those things still apply the exact same way. But by default, you're probably going to go Slayer most of the time. However, there is also the Bow Braver. And in the case of the Bow Braver, what I said for Detector and what I said for Force applies here as well. In most situations, you're not going to be doing a ton of damage. Bow Braver does not do crazy amounts of damage. It's pretty low on the damage meter. So you can pretty safely assume you're not going to have threat most of the time. However, if you want to take that gamble, it's up to you. Ranger's still a solid choice because of that. Moving on, we have Bouncer. Bouncer pretty definitively is going to take Slayer as a subclass most of the time. You can make an argument for Force or Detector based on what you're doing currently. Maybe you're in an ARCS record or whatever it happens to be. Taking some of the brands and blots, depending on if you're playing, you know, hybrid Bouncer is an option that's available for you. You could totally go that route. I play Soaring Blades only Bouncer, so I don't worry about those sort of things. So if you play the same way I do, that's something you can actually take to your advantage. However, it is something to keep in mind or think about whenever you're looking at your subclass choices. By default, Slayer is going to be what you mostly go with. Detector and Force apply in the same sort of way. Of course, then you have Ranger for DFD and Waker for that defensive option if you really, really want to be that tanky. Waker, it's just Slayer. Everything applies the same way, but you're mostly going to go Slayer. You have everything else that you really need. You don't really need much of, you're not really hurting for anything in Slayer's in Waker's tree. So I would just go ahead and slap on Slayer and keep on moving. And as for Slayer, I know I've said Slayer a lot. In Slayer situation, Bouncer is actually a pretty solid choice. Bouncer and Fighter are pretty solid choices depending upon what you're fighting. Most of the time, you're going to default to something like Bouncer just because it applies in more situations than not, where Fighter only applies to downs. However, there are bosses that have specific downs that don't count as downs. They've updated it so those apply to those situations more often, but it's not perfect. So it's one of the situations where you kind of have to decide what you're fighting. The de facto choice I've seen most players go is Bouncer. That's pretty comfortable. Everything else applies the same way. If you're looking for extra PP, Force, Tector if you need PV generation, Ranger if you're in the situation where you have a Ranger and you're doing DFD, those are all pretty solid choices. And that's pretty much it. That covers every single class and the subclass choices and how you would use them. Hopefully that helps someone out there that's trying to figure out how to utilize their subclass. It's totally okay to pick a subclass based on wanting to use a weapon. Just keep in mind, you're going to use that weapon worse if you hadn't been just a main class of that specific weapon itself. The game just isn't designed for you to pick a main class and a subclass based on the weapons that you're just choosing. It's designed differently. Doesn't mean that it matters all that much because, like I said, at the end of the day, damage is a choice, not a requirement in this game. And that's totally fine to play that sort of way. It's not the way I play, but everyone's different. Hopefully that helps. Thanks for watching all the end. Like if you enjoyed the video. So if you want to keep up with more, as always, thanks to our channel members. You guys are fantastic and I appreciate your faces. More ranks than channel members to come soon, so keep an eye out for that. Either way, take care, my friends. Peace out.